Fosi V3 Mono. Just like Fosi V3, but that one was stereo and this is mono, so you need two of these to power your speakers. But two is always better than one. Two pieces of cake, better than one. Two speakers, hello, stereo, better than one. Two girls, feel free to comment down below if you disagree with me and like to be wrong. So one of these monoblocks is a small amplifier meant to power one of your speakers. Because of that, in the front you only have two switches. No volume knob, because this is a real power amplifier and volume attenuation has to be done somewhere else before the signal reaches these little puppies. One switch is to choose between RCA and XLR connection on the back, and the other one is to turn it off, turn it on always, or put it on auto, which is detect when signal is incoming, turn on the power amps, and if nothing is playing, no music is on, after some 10 to 15 minutes, it will turn off. It will go into standby and wait for the signal. I love this way of functioning. I use power amplifiers that are doing the same and I'm very used to it. Everybody should have an auto option. And in the back you can see that one RCA input, one XLR input, and two binding posts for one speaker, of course. And there is one small switch that you can see you can change your gain between 25 or 31 dB. These two are quite close and I tried both. I didn't notice any meaningful difference in terms of how it performs, the sound fidelity, just choose one. And the last thing that you can see here fully on the right is a small power jack, and this says 32 to 48 volts DC, meaning that the power supply itself is once again located outside of these small boxes. And in this case, it comes, one of the options actually that you have is to use one big chunky power supply. Here I have 48 volts, 10 amperes that is capable to drive both of these units. And how do you drive both of these? Well, there is a splitter cable in the end that you hook to this power jack, and it splits in two. And I saw on the web that some people had problems with only one power supply powering both units, and I think that was the early version of this power supply, and I did not experience anything like that. Just for a good measure, I tried using two fully separate power supplies of 48 volts 5 amperes that I got with Fosi ZA3 and Fosi V3 to power each of these monoblocks separately, and I didn't notice any difference in noise that was non-existent in both cases, or just in the sound fidelity. Using this one bigger and more powerful with a splitter resulted in the completely same sound fidelity. And this whole package, a power supply and two monoblocks, I believe costs $250 US. And looking at tech specs, these don't seem to be that much different from the stereo version of V3. Starting with the power rating that's basically the same. But actually, if you dig a little bit deeper, you'll notice that these now have much better load dependency. Actually, they do not have load dependency as much as V3 or ZA3 had, meaning that the frequency response and power delivered in all frequencies will be much more stable no matter what is the load and what is the impedance of the load of the speaker. And that's actually a good development. But I don't really put much faith into graphs and marketing material and promises made by the manufacturer. You know, they always have to promise something wilder, something better than the last time, because they have to sell the product, right? Instead, I like to listen to a product for myself and compare it with other similar products to see its worth. So let's do that. And as I said in the beginning of the video, these are power amplifiers. They do not possess any sort of volume attenuation, and you have to use that before the signal reaches V3 monoblocks. So that can be a true preamplifier. That's probably the best option, or it can be a DAC that has volume attenuation, basically a preamp functionality. And I tested these with all kinds of sources, and I can tell you that they are very good and very transparent. And while it might seem at first that something like Fosi's own P3 would be a very good pairing, I can immediately, right out of the bat, tell you that these are actually better performers, and P3 would be bottlenecking their clarity and their transparency and just how snappy and alive they can sound. They don't feel out of place with much pricier sources hooked to them and pricier speakers hooked to them, and they don't feel out of place. They're that good. Starting with tonality, they're very, very tonally neutral, just like previous Fosi V3 and ZA3 were. And that's a good thing. So these are not coloring the sound in any particular way. There are no excessive brightness or warmth or just muddy, huge bass line or anything like that. In terms of tonality, everything is really well balanced from the bass throughout the mid-range and in highs. In terms of just pairing these with anything else, you can pair them with anything you like. And if you think they sound too analytical or too dry or something like that, that's probably your source or your speakers actually. So I guess that first description that comes to mind is very tonally neutral and very transparent. We have clean dark background, clean tones with clearly outlined edges, there is good separation, there is good layering inside of the soundstage, and I thought that just the overall dynamics and liveliness is slightly better, that these amps are a touch more snappy and more focused and offer slightly better attack than I remember V3 doing, even though, as I said, these don't have more power when you look at the tech spec table. So I wanted to check that, so I quickly compared them to V3 stereo and ZA3. Now V3 and ZA3 are basically the same, almost the same amps, with ZA3 having a better connectivity and better cooling, but they are much more the same than they're different. So when I compare them directly, I was happy to notice that these V3 monoblocks had a better sound staging. It was a bit wider and more decluttered compared to ZA3 and V3 that are slightly pushed towards the center and more in between the speakers than these two monos. They spread the soundstage a little bit, they make layering slightly better, and they outline tones a bit cleaner. And that's for sure not a huge difference, but we do not have any big differences to talk about here, and the only thing I can talk about are these small differences. So while the overall tonality is very similar and you can immediately notice that clean and clear and neutral Fosi sound, V3 monos are doing it slightly better. That slightly bigger soundstage and that slightly better layering makes music more easier to follow and to realize what's happening, where's where, how things are separated and arranged inside the soundstage. And then moving away from the sound staging, I felt that monos are just slightly snappier and more alive, quicker sounding than ZA3, and especially V3 stereo, that is for some reason the most mellow sounding of all. It has slightly mellower way of presenting edges and doing fast-paced rhythms and just being very quick to start and stop. And if you would ask me about the worth of V3 monos compared to V3 stereo or ZA3, I would say yeah, they're worth it. Sure, if you only watch the price of these amps, V3 monos are twice the price of V3 stereo, and they do not sound twice better, it's just not how that works. And you could say like, no, it's not worth it. But look at the wider picture. If you have a whole hi-fi setup and you maybe are using $400-500 speakers and several $100 DAC, and believe me, these amps are more than good enough to be in that kind of system, then you are not thinking about the price difference only between V3 stereo and V3 monos. You're actually thinking about your whole budget. And should I spend $1,000 or $1,100? And in that case, when we are talking about 10% price difference, I believe that V3 mono blocks are definitely worth it. With that in mind, can they actually threaten another fantastic sounding and very clean sounding amplifier like Topping PA7 Plus that I have here? And I compare them directly, and for that comparison I engaged bypass mode on PA7 Plus. So I use it also only as a power amplifier and using other means of controlling the volume, not its own. So we could actually compare apples to apples. And what I noticed is that PA7 Plus is still slightly cleaner sounding. This one is as clean as a whistle. And even though in isolation you would never say that these Fosi mono blocks don't sound clean or crisp in any way, because they really are, PA7 Plus manages to be just slightly cleaner and offers slightly darker and deeper background. And there is also a ever so slightly wider soundstage with PA7 Plus. And aside from that, I feel that Fosi maybe offers just a touch more warmth inside of the bass and mid-bass region, whereas Topping goes with more clean and very tidy bassline. But the difference is not big. Both of these I would call almost dead neutral, but Topping is slightly tighter sounding in the bassline, whereas Fosi is slightly warmer sounding in the bassline. That's basically it. Most of their qualities and what they do great overlaps, but Topping has slight advantage in overall cleanliness and clarity and just slightly bigger sound staging. Once again, is that worth it twice the price? I don't know. I cannot tell you that. It's on you to decide. But I can tell you this. Just for fun, I tried using Fosi V3 monos in my main big room setup. And this was a very unreasonable thing to do, because the price of this whole system is north of 10Ks, and V3 monos are not meant to be used in the system like this one. And I can tell you that I did not feel nearly as stupid as I should, because V3s, as I said, are hugely transparent. And they just took that rich and full tonality of my preamp and my DAC, and they barely suffocated any of that goodness before passing it to speakers. And I enjoyed quite full, rich, even quite three-dimensional sound staging using just V3 monoblocks. Sure, I could notice some limits compared to my regular Acoustic Invader Class D monoblocks that are 1200 watts per channel. These Fosis cannot get as loud as easily. They do not develop as big of a soundstage, but having just slightly more reasonable expectations inside of more modest soundstage, and if you do not push volume levels too hard, these V3 monoblocks actually didn't sound that much out of place at all. Meaning that inside the most real-life use case scenarios, V3 monoblocks are not going to be a limiting factor. The chances are that actually a preamp and the speakers will be the ones bottlenecking your whole system and not V3 monos. So if you happen to assemble something like a really good DAC like Geshelli J2S or even SMSL SU10, and then have a truly great preamp like Lederbach or Schiit-Freya Plus, and then add really good speakers like Burkhardt S400 MK2, and you use these monoblocks, yes, it would look funny, yes, it might hurt your manly, muscly pride, but it would still sound very fine. And if you took any of these other components, a DAC, a preamp, or speakers, and you exchanged for something that's 250, making the amps cost 1000 or more, you would probably get worse sound fidelity. And I believe that speaks a lot about sound quality and sound transparency of these little amps. And as long as you don't expect something unrealistic of them, like real life volume of a drum set or concert levels that you can rock your house and make a rave party, chances are that V3 monos are actually going to exceed your expectations in terms of sound fidelity and sound quality and just outright transparency. That would be all for today, guys. Hope you liked the video. See you next time.